So looking at the situation with Shane King, he's a rugby player, apparently plays for the Marcos. In fact, I might even got that wrong. That's how much I know about his rugby career. Apparently, after his rugby career, which I believe there was some kind of injury involved there, and he's become kind of a bit of also an activist for sort of brain injuries in sports. But after this injury, he went on a journey which had him very concerned about local and national politics. Again, I don't know anything about his background. I don't know if he's religious or not. I don't know whether what he was saying made sense, but I do know a couple of things which have got me just kind of disturbed about this case. One is, again, there's sort of an inference that has attached Shane King to this kind of like sovereign movement, which is kind of happening again. There's this, it's again, you don't need to know anything about sovereignty movement. This is not going to be a video about sovereignty or justifying anything. The aspect is what I'm trying to get across is that right now around the world, in the United Kingdom, in Australia, in Canada, in New Zealand, there's kind of a very large orchestrated movement that if you show any degree of patriotism, then you're immediately classed as being some kind of right-wing supremacist. Now, in the case of New Zealand, many of the people that are behind this are actually Maori to begin with. So what they're actually, in their case, where the opposition comes from, and I suspect it's probably also you'll find similar. If you go to around the world, you find that these movements are not strictly actually Caucasian as they're made out to be, but it's people that are really more concerned with the issue of being forced to take globalist agendas which are actually hurting their ability to actually just have a normal life. And in the case of migration, it's really an issue that we've had government that have brought in migration for the purpose of effectively doing what they want to do by bringing in block voting, but it's also they're betraying the people they're bringing in to do that because they don't provide the infrastructure or deliver on the promises. So those people actually end up being in the same worst situation we all are. So again, that's really the real issue. We're not anti-immigration. We're anti the Global Migration Pact. Its true form for what it really is the the World Without Walls that neoliberal salesman Mike Moore sold on behalf of Rogernomics in the 80s. And so they've repackaged it to make it out like, if you oppose people coming into your country, you're a racist. When that's not what we're actually about. We're about the fact that you're dumping people in to the workforce to actually lower the actual wages so that you can have more power over the workforce. Unfortunately, it gets confused because there are racist people within these particular movements, and these people sadly have also done a very good job of squeezing their fingers into the unions, especially in Australia with the construction, forestry, engineer, mining unions, and that's been controlled by organised crime, which again, that gets used as this is why unions are so bad, and these sort of fake sovereign movements that are, confusing the issue, which again, you follow the money back, it normally goes back to big corporations and mining interests. Counter spin being a classic example. Kelvin Alps here, Stephen QAnon network. We know that can be strongly established, which of course is Donald Trump drill baby drill, and of course Kelvin Alps comes from the mining background, and of course he also happens to be affiliated to a Hells Angel gang. That's the gang that's bringing in drugs into the country and helping smash people up even further, which is happening in Australia and New Zealand. So again, you can sort of tell Kelvin gives game away because he's trying to be a journalist and he's also trying to be running for political office, and you can't. So any form of alternative media that's trying to tell you, vote for me or vote for that person, they're not journalists, they're propagandists. Let's be quite clear about that. And when you're in these kind of movements, these are the people that you need to steer away with because they are there. And that's what they're seeing an opportunity. So they're trying to go, give this to us, follow us, we'll follow through. They have no intention of following through. And again, there's a couple of videos we'll be doing on people within the sovereign movement next year with some really good sources, some really good information showing these kind of scumbags that have been using these opportunities to drain out donations made for these causes, and while giving the place, the movement's bad names. At the same time, this is going on as well with the victims of the Christchurch shooting, lost millions and millions of dollars. And again, one of these stories that nobody in mainstream media, they say they're against extremism and corruption, supposedly, but when it comes down to actually immigrants being ripped off millions of dollars, they don't really want to. They're not too keen to actually investigate the charity, even though that charity does actually link to an actual right wing organisation that's actually anti-Islamic. No, they don't want to investigate that at all. So it just shows you how full of shit they actually are. Now back to Shane King. So they've tried to make him out to, in this case again, the smearing, he's a sovereign nutter. Well, a couple of things. Like, my understanding was that no, in that case, his issue was with the conduct of basically, animals pest control in Nelson, and he had questions about that. So it had nothing to do with the sovereignty movement. And I know there'll be people like Brian Tamaki and so on trying to martyr Shane for their own causes, because they're basically cockroaches and they can't help themselves. But yes, no, my understanding was he was there to complain about actual fairly kind of domesticated stuff when he alleges on a video that he made that he was assaulted by members of the Nelson City Council, and they did so in front of a camera. And when he brought this up with the police have actually refused, which is again not a Commonwealth simple act of legislation. If you go to the police and you say, look, I've got proof of serious crime, they actually inspect and investigate, and if they make no attempt to do it, that includes being caught on film, not bringing out their notebook, which is what we actually have here. We've got evidence of him saying, why don't you investigate it, and the police officer not actually lifting a finger. So that's actually on camera. So again, Nelson Police, pay attention to that, because this is not a hearsay situation. Okay, you've actually been caught on camera not investigating a crime. And again, further question to the mainstream media would be, well, okay, he's made this claim and there is a camera there, and again, lots of those Nelson media journalists can go into that Nelson City Council and look where they're looking and see for themselves. It's, again, not that hard to investigate, or anybody watching this video, if you want to pick up with a ball and start actually getting fact-based stuff, that would be my first question, is let's find out whether or not there was a camera where he said this allegation actually took place. In which case, we then go down to the issue. What worries me is that one of the people which has been subject to these accusations by Shane, I saw a picture of them in the Nelson City buildings, and they have some item which looks extremely military orientated. I'm not going to try and say what it actually is, but it worries me because it definitely is designed to look like a weapon. And they also have one of these very heavy mag types which have dual purpose, and one of the things that's actually used is a truncheon. So this guy is doing his best to look like an SS Gestapo soldier, and I'm kind of like going, when does the Nelson City Council be okay with its employees wandering around with weapons? As far as I'm aware, there's only one authority agency in this country that's actually organised to carry actual weapons, and that's the police. And any attempt to try and impersonate anything else, that's no. And I don't care if you're a dog handler. You don't walk into the Nelson City Council, which is a place for the public people, and it's just disrespectful. And this is really what, again, I guess this is what I say about the Shane King and the sovereign movement, is that we've got to a point now where anybody that challenges the constitutional gets dismissed out of hand, especially if they're not coming from the iwi, which is directly linked into the corporate body. If you're coming from the whānau or the hapu level, it doesn't matter whether you're Caucasian or Maori, you're just dismissed. No, you don't know what you're talking about, leave it to the experts. Well, we've actually seen from 2020 that actually the experts don't know that much, and that's slowly coming back to bite them back in their arse. And I will use still called bass. But yes, the key thing is that the idea there that anyone challenges it suddenly gets accused of being involved in the sovereignty movement. And also the aspect of here's an idea, instead of worrying about extremists online on the sovereignty movement, why don't we focus about the growing inequality of economics? Why don't we worry about the housing crisis? Why don't we worry about the fact that food inflation is... My general guess of general rule of thought pattern would be, if all of those issues were actually addressed, the sovereign movements would actually disappear. And again, I'm acknowledging the sovereign movements have these, grifters, and some of them have actually been imported deliberately, and I've again written about this very clearly. But the real issue that people are actually upset about is basically basic things like food, housing are not being addressed. They're dealing with local councils that don't show any respect to their voters, that are clearly in the grips of whatever the corporate lobbyists who effectively are running them. It's institutionalized corruption. Let's call it for what it is. And Shane King, let's get back to the final case here. Like, the final point I want to make about Shane King is that what we also know about Shane King is that he actually has received a head injury. So if he actually has been assaulted, that assault could be serious enough to actually cause a death. So we don't actually know what the cause of his death is. The media's not talking about it. Or in fact, they're using a lot of inference, which makes you suggest it's suicide. In fact, I think some media commentators have actually come out with saying probable suicide. We don't know. So that's again part of the whole lollygagging about this. Is like trying to say we don't know because there hasn't been an autopsy, but we do know he made allegations of an assault, and we do know that he asked the police officer to investigate it. We can see on film that police officer is not bringing out his notebook. So we've got a real issue going on here, because basically we now have a dead person, and we are having not even the fourth estate is doing the process of the state, and all it's going to do is make people more mad, more angry, more likely to be driven to be radicalized and driven to extremist causes. So you will become a self-fulfilling prophecy. At the end of the day, again, the media has actually been very two-faced about this, because let's say it's all those things. Shane's a nutty to sovereign citizen, and he's gone nutty because he's had it. Well, he's gone nutty probably because he's had a head injury. And we're at the point now where it's like we don't have any empathy for people to understand that maybe the actual pain and issues that he was going on. And we certainly should expect our Nelson City Councils to actually be aware that people have these issues. And especially for all the things that we've gone through, what happened to Be Kind? No, apparently what's okay, and this is not the first time that's happened, and I know many people out there, in fact, Rob Torkler is a good example. Again, I can think of actually 4 or 5 cases in very recent times where the police have just shown, and not just the police, council agencies have just shown excessive abuse. And it seems to be that we no longer can actually expect any of this stuff to be investigated. And we already know that the Independent Police Complaints Authority is basically a joke. We know that because in the book Stoned on Duty, co-written by Peter Williams and Bruce Ainsley, Peter Gibsons, who's a private detective, basically says to Peter Williams when he's trying to expose what's going on with the police department and the fact that they've got this attitude of no corruption occurs on the police department, so we refuse to investigate it, and therefore, of course, it does actually take place. But on tape, he's got Peter Gibson saying, well, actually, the IPCA is just there to whitewash it for us, Peter, so stop rocking waves, because you're just pushing poop up against hell. And of course, this sort of thing happens so many times now. And again, we even go to the case of the Scott Watson case, which is links to David Bain by the same police officer. And we're increasingly seeing that the DNA of that Scott Watson case is falling apart. And at the same time, only our second top police officer has just gone down for naughty nasties. And again, everyone's focusing on the naughty nasties, but no one's, which is, that's behind a screen. Nobody knows you're going tappity tap tap. Unless it tripped the right wires, who would know? But this was also a guy that had a luxury car rental business, and he's driving to work just like Shane Swan every day in multiple luxury cars, and it wasn't ringing bells along with his multiple houses. That was because of the lack of the culture of counterintelligence, the lack of culture of believing that there needed to be accountability and transparency within organisations. And unfortunately, Shane King, whether or not he was a sovereign citizen or was being a nutter or actually had a genuine cause, appears to have been a victim of the situation. And right now, the idea is that because he's a hero, let's have a soldier's funeral for him, and then we'll bury him in the ground and we'll forget about it and we won't mention it ever again. But I don't think this one's actually going to go away. And yes, there are going to be the scumbags like Brian Tamaki and Cohen Alps and other, drifters and grifters that will be trying to use this cause to push their agenda. Now, again, my little reminder is, if you're dealing with a platform that also wants you to give money to them on Sunday or put their person in Parliament, probably not journalists. Just putting that out there. But on the other hand, if you're dealing with platforms that actually take that you can see that they are going out there and batting against the blue team and the red team and the green team and the yellow team because they're just against corruption, and they're willing to show you actual facts and not go down the rabbit hole of speculation, maybe you deserve to give those guys a little bit more time than you're actually giving some of these grifters out there. And then maybe we can start to get some accountability, because again, why these grifters exist is because that accountability system puts them in there to run interference. So what you've got to get doing is you've got to get better at collecting evidence and better at discerning information, so that you don't get sucked into the rabbit hole of becoming someone's renter mob, and instead you can be like someone like Shane King, who was fairly genuine in his cause and his concern of other human beings. And I think we deserve that record of that fine young man to at least get to the bottom of actually why was his assault case not, number one, why was his assault case not investigated when he requested it? Number two, why has no one checked out to try and verify whether any of his story is actually true, in terms of are there cameras in that particular place? Number three, why are no questions being actually asked of those Nelson personnel, again, specifically, like, why is it okay for them to carry weapons around inside the Nelson City Council? That's a pretty big question, I think. And number four, in the event that there actually has been an allegation made of assault by the person in question on film, why has there not been an autopsy? And why is, we also need to understand that when we talk about the coroner's report, is that the coroner is not Quincy Jones, who goes and does all the forensic stuff. He just writes his recommendations, and it's normally what the police want. So we need a bit more, something about the family. The family are concerned, and I think they get the final say. They need to really lobby hard for a full inquest, a full coroner's inquest, where they can get to ask questions, and this can actually be dragged out into the open. And we need to also, find out a little bit. We need to get the process of whistleblowing. And when there are accusations like these being made by people who have some mana, that they're not just dismissed. At the end of the day, Shane may have had issues, and I said, I don't know his history. I'm just saying that may be the case, but we also know that this man had a very, very extremely impeccable record, and he didn't deserve to be treated like this. And it's an absolute indictment on the Nelson City Council that this is how they treat their sons. This is Ben Vidgen on the Deadline Report, in this case, Deadline TV.